Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. Lewis Hamilton's given his perspective on the major rumours yesterday that Fred Vasseur's future at Ferrari may be under serious risk. Hamilton says that as far as he's concerned, he does not want to see Fred Vasseur going anywhere. He was the key reason why Hamilton joined the team in the first place, and that is not going to change if Hamilton has anything to say about it. But the rumours still continue over the last 24 hours that Ferrari need a strong weekend here in Montreal if they're to make sure that Fred Vasseur's job is safe for the near future. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's crack straight on with things, because plenty happening. This is Yuki Tsunoda. He may keep the Red Bull seat for the rest of the season. That is the present rumour, but he may not. And Tsunoda even admits that if he doesn't improve his performances, starting really in Montreal, he wants a bit of a reset this weekend after what was a very challenging Barcelona Grand Prix. His time at Red Bull may be coming to an end rather soon. Now, the team has basically said, even publicly near enough, that they will back Yuki until at least the end of the year. But after that, who knows? And of course, you do have the whole Isaac Hadjar question looming on the horizon as well that we'll see here in a second. This is Tsunoda's helmet for his 100th Grand Prix, Canada 2025, so he's obviously going to be hoping that it's a rather good one. But Isaac Hadjar was asked to comment on these whole rumours, right? Because Tsunoda's been underperforming, again, you start to get the concerns from the Red Bull side that they're going to do it again, right? They're going to run it back with another driver change in the team. Lawson, obviously Perez last year, Lawson, Tsunoda. Who knows who's coming in next? Red Bull at this point should have learned their lesson, but Hadjar has been asked questions, and even Peter Bayer, the top guy at Racing Bulls, was like, look, please, Christian Horner, don't take Hadjar away from us. It wouldn't be the right time, and also it's not good for us as the sister team because Hadjar currently is scoring points for us. But when asked the question about this, Hadjar says, I can say for sure that I don't feel ready to step up to the main Red Bull team. That is a fact. And look, whether he does feel ready or not, I think he knows, and his advisors probably know, his management staff and all this, that it's in his best interests not to go to Red Bull right now. Even if he does feel like, you know what, yeah, stick me in then, Sarah Yuki, I'll do the job against Max. Or like, not against Max, but with Max, shall we say. Even if he does feel that way, and I'm not really sure that he does. Like, I think he's got his head screwed on. But he does say, like, it's a bit scary. I wouldn't feel ready to do it. I maybe haven't experienced a tricky car enough, because that's the talk about the Racing Bulls, that it's relatively benign. It's not like the Red Bull RB21. Certainly Tsunoda has made comments like that. So Hadjar and his team are trying their best to keep him there, and, you know, Red Bull not to make any kind of rash decisions. I don't think they will. I think the current status quo will remain. But next year is the big question, right? Like, if this continues for Yuki, it's pretty likely that they will decide, Red Bull, okay, we're going to give somebody else a go, at which point Hadjar becomes a very viable option. The Verstappen-Russell drama from Spain continued yesterday as well, because, of course, back in the paddock, the drivers are going to be asked plenty of questions, and that was a big one at last weekend for good reason, and therefore George Russell got his opportunity to say a few words last weekend. It was kind of funny, right? We know that he was on his way to Roland Garros this weekend for the French Open, for the tennis, that, of course, Alcaraz won, and Russell was there. It was pretty funny if you look at Roland Garros' Twitter for that, or their Instagram, I think it was, for that final. You saw pictures of Alcaraz, you saw pictures of Sinner, and then you mainly saw pictures of Russell as well. He was almost like the third man of the final. But he says that he bumped into Max at the airport when he was going to Roland Garros, and to be honest, I totally forgot about Barcelona because he was there with his newborn. So, you know, maybe Russell would have had a word, but he saw Max there with his new daughter and was like, okay, whatever, like, this is kind of cute. We're at the security machine, we had a quick chat, and then he was busy folding the pram to put it through the machine. So maybe that's kind of saved some of the drama. But Russell did take the opportunity to get a couple of digs in. He was relatively, you know, lenient yesterday in his words that he said. He probably could have been a little harsher, but obviously it's been 2 weeks, so it's, you know, things would have calmed down somewhat. But he did say, based on Max's Instagram post, that I wouldn't say Max apologized or took total responsibility, but he did say that the incident at Turn 5 shouldn't have happened, which, as we said at the time, is about as good as you're going to get from Max. And Russell says, I was a bit surprised to see him taking responsibility because it's quite unlike him. So, you know, this is a very Russell thing to say. I thought it was pretty funny. And they also went on to say the following, George, if he gets to 12 points, a ban would not be unjust. At the end of the day, that's why the penalty points are there. If you keep driving recklessly, you will accumulate points and get punished with a race ban. I'm not looking for an apology. His actions cost him and they benefited me, so I should almost be thanking him, which is true at the end of the day. So, I'm sure we're going to see more between the pair of these guys. Of course, the media was pushing Max quite heavily on did you do it intentionally? Did you do it intentionally? They wanted an answer. Max wasn't going to say, and he says, look, I don't need to discuss that anymore. I'm not going to stand here and say exactly who was at fault. I think we know who was at fault. The question was whether there was more to it than that, but whatever. That's a question now for a couple of weeks ago, and we will move on and see whether we get more drama, because let's not forget this race last year, we had Russell and Verstappen on pole. They had the same pole time. Russell got pole, but they started on the front row. Russell, did pretty well, but in the end it was a difficult race with rain and with difficult conditions, and as usual in those circumstances, Max Verstappen found a way to win over Norris and Russell on the day. Russell said Mercedes F1 contract talks are on hold because we've got bigger fish to fry. Now, okay, do we believe this? Or are there other talks on, are there other reasons why the talks are on hold? This, of course, points to the debate around Max, and it's always going to be a story. While Max has not exactly said for sure what his future's going to be, and neither have necessarily the teams around him, while it's still a bit of a question, Russell even says, look, my goal is to stay with Mercedes. I think that is Toto's intention too. But if Max is on the radar, why wouldn't he be? He's one of the greatest ever. I get that. It's down to you to prove your worth, and I feel like I've done that time and time again over the course of 7 years in F1 and my whole career. I have no concerns. So again, I just find myself more and more impressed over time with Russell's mentality, and I think it translates to his on-track performance in general. We'll see this weekend, because Mercedes should be stronger than they've been for the last couple of rounds. They tend to go better when it's cooler conditions, and it's not exactly boiling hot here in Montreal right now. Let's talk quickly on McLaren before we discuss the Ferrari drama, because both of the drivers, and even Zach Brown said it a few rounds ago, at some points there will be flashpoints, right? I think as fans we're kind of waiting for it. After Spain, it feels like the championship is going to be a two-horse race between the two McLarens, and I'm hoping, and I'm pretty optimistic, that it potentially will go all the way down to the wire this season as well. Lando might need to find something to make that happen, but I think that he can. And the team fundamentally are saying, look, McLaren come first. That's the way that the drivers look at it. Maybe the team will kind of say, look, guys, until we've got this constructors sewn up and signed, sealed, delivered, guarantees, it's literally a championship that we've won, then, let's kind of keep it a little bit careful between the pair of you. But realistically, the championship is won already. So it's not really massively a talking point there. And as Norris says, as a number one, it's a constructor, right? So the number one driver is not me, it's not Piastri, it's McLaren. That's what Lando says. So, very towing the party line. But he does also mention that with Piastri, there will come a time where there are incidents. And I think we're waiting for this, and it is going to happen at some point. When it happens, the question is, what happens, right? Do we get cool down room drama? Do we get comments being made publicly? I think it's going to be kind of like what happened with Lando and Max last year. The first couple of times things happened, things were relatively, easy. Not that much was really said. But then when Austria came around, and there was, of course, the drama there that cost Lando serious points, then things got rather spicy. Now, of course, Max is that guy, whereas Lando and Oscar don't necessarily behave in that way. They're not quite the same personalities as we have seen get into real dramatic championship fights over the last couple of decades. But at some point it will happen, and Lando says, we've actually been quite open in saying at some point, probably something is going to happen. We'll try and avoid everything as much as possible, but it's inevitable that it happens in racing. So, pretty interesting, I thought, from Lando to mention that, yeah, probably at some point we will collide, or we will, there will be some sort of drama, let's say, such as in Monza last year, when Oscar went around the outside of Lando and then cost Lando the second place to Leclerc. Instances like that will occur, and when both of them are fighting for the championship, it's going to get very interesting to see what is said after the race. I think for the first couple of times this happens, and I'm hoping there'll be plenty of times, but for the first couple of times, they'll probably deal with it relatively well. But as the championship gets serious, and as it really starts to sink in for Lando and Oscar that, yeah, this might be your only ever chance to win the world championship, because who knows what happens in the future, this is when you've got to execute, right? So Lando says, yeah, the relationship will change at some point. When that happens, we're on round 10 of the season. I'm hoping it's going to be this weekend, but equally I'm hoping that it's not just between the two McLarens and somebody else can get involved as well. But let's talk about Ferrari, because it's probably not going to be them. if this issue that Hamilton is referencing continues, and this is one of the reasons why Leclerc and Hamilton are frustrated, but also one of the serious reasons why Vasseur is under pressure, and why there's even some talk about Loic Serra. He's come in as the technical guy over there now, leading the charge on that front. He's not had long really to make much impact, and there's a feeling that the rear suspension changes that they're bringing for Austria or Silverstone, that will be a key deciding factor. Now, Hamilton talked about an issue that was affecting them in Spain. We know that he was having a torrid Grand Prix, Hamilton, and was super frustrated with the balance of the car, couldn't seem to get on top of it, and told his engineer on the radio after the race, after getting overtaken by Hülkenberg, that that was the worst balance of a car that I've ever had in my life. It was awful. And thankfully for Hamilton, after the race, they did tell him that, yeah, we did have a serious car issue that was affecting performance. Hamilton says that obviously the team doesn't want to talk about what it is, so, well, we can do a bit of speculation here. But he said that it massively affected the car. The team doesn't want to talk about what was hindering us massively, but what I didn't know, whether or not I had the problem, but I said on the radio it was the worst feeling ever in the car, and at the end of the race, after the interviews, we were told that, okay, yes, there was an issue. So what is this issue? Now, there's a couple of maybe pointers here. China was a very telling Grand Prix this season. They won the sprint, and then in the main race, they were kind of nowhere on pace, and then they got disqualified for plank wear, and Charles Leclerc's car was underweight, and Hamilton's car was disqualified for plank wear. It seems to me that there's some issue in the suspension, which they're looking to change at the rear of the car, where the plank at the rear seems to wear a lot. Now, there was even talk in Spain that towards the end of the straights, they were telling Leclerc to do lift and coast, not because they were running low on fuel, not because they wanted to manage temperatures, but because they wanted to manage plank wear. If he goes flat out at the end of the straight or flat out at more of the time, the plank's going to be hitting the floor more often because you're going at higher speeds, the floor's generating more downforce, making the car a little bit more unstable. And therefore, you're getting more plank wear, and it's potentially getting on the risk of disqualification. If you actually look at the numbers on out of the races so far this season, you know that they do random checks on the cars. I think out of the 9 Grand Prix, in maybe 4 of them, they've checked Leclerc's car, potentially for the plank wear. So it feels like the FIA know that Ferrari are running a risk here in terms of that. And, well, the question is, okay, what do you do about it? Because if there's a rear suspension issue, which means that the plank wear is at risk, maybe you have to run the rear suspension very stiff, which potentially affects your performance in many of the corners. Maybe that's what Hamilton's getting at, or you have to raise the ride height, which simply costs you performance. And maybe whatever Ferrari's attempted solution is to this current issue is really hindering them a lot, and it's something that maybe even increased as a problem throughout the Grand Prix for Hamilton. So a little bit unclear, but I would say that has something to do with it, and I think that, as we're going to discuss in a second here with Fred Vasseur, there often is no smoke without fire, in the sense that if they're changing the rear suspension, Ferrari, it probably tells you that there's some sort of serious issue that they're trying to currently solve on the rear of their car. So that's my perspective. Intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. But let's talk about Fred Vasseur, because yesterday there were 3 publications in Italy. Mainly there were 2 from the Gazzetta and Corriere. They dropped a couple of bombshells talking about Fred Vasseur's position being at risk. Now, there's been lots of debate. Was this an orchestrated attack, as it were? Was it just more so coincidence that they happened to drop the articles basically at the same time? Is there any pressure seriously from Ferrari? Because, look, when reports start to emerge in the Italian press that Leclerc is losing faith, that Ferrari are losing faith, there's probably some level of truth to it. Whether anything actually happens because of it, whether it would be wise, I don't really think so. Ferrari said, yeah, that's not going to happen. There's no doubt about it that Vasseur's going to continue. But of course, that's what they always say until they don't, as we know. Now, lots of drivers were questioned on this, and I will say the timing of the announcements from the media were interesting in the sense that they dropped the articles on Thursday morning, knowing, let's be real, that the media day was happening in just a few hours' time and everyone was going to get quizzed on it. Now, of course, that brings more traction to those publications, so it's just probably good business. But equally, they know they're fanning the flames there by dropping them on Thursday before everyone turns up for media day. So, and obviously it's a big weekend as well. They could have dropped it at another time, but, whether it was coincidence or intention, that's what happened. So Sainz, who used to be at Ferrari, of course, was asked the question and said, look, this is Ferrari. It's the same old story. The moment the results don't click, things start to be questions. There's always finger pointing from the media. This is how it goes. But Leclerc was quizzed, understandably, on the rumours that he's, losing confidence in the team. And, would I be surprised if he is? No, I think it would only be a logical reaction. But Leclerc, who's always, he's a great PR guy. He does love Ferrari, he really does. But I can understand why he may be feeling, if another opportunity arrives, maybe Ferrari aren't the team, especially if they were to make a change for Vasseur. I think that's the way that I look at it, right, is Leclerc and Hamilton were very defensive of Vasseur's leadership, and that's probably inevitable, but they have strong relationships there. And if Ferrari were to make a serious change there, I think that it would definitely affect the way that Leclerc and Hamilton feel about the team. Leclerc says, I don't know what you guys are talking about, me thinking about leaving Ferrari. I want to bring Ferrari back to the top. But Hamilton and Leclerc also gave comment on Vasseur specifically. Hamilton says, first of all, I love working with Fred. Fred is the main reason I'm in this team. So that's a very, Hamilton was very emphatic in saying, look, if Fred wasn't here, I probably wouldn't be here. And the implication also is if Fred was to go, then what would that mean for me, let's say? Fred's the main reason I'm here. Of course, they worked together back in the GP2 days, way back in the day. Good relationship for many a year. The opportunity I got, I'm forever grateful for. We're in this together. We're working harder than background. Things aren't perfect, but for me, I'm here to work for the team. And also with Fred, I want Fred here. I do believe that Fred is the person to take us to the top, so that's that. So Hamilton being very emphatic in his defense, saying, it's nonsense. I think he went on to answer another question to say, the articles are nonsense, what's being written. For everyone writing stories about me not racing, I've literally just started, and I'm here for the long haul, zero doubts. So he wasn't even asked about that, but it was clearly on his mind or something, because Hamilton went on to describe how, I'm not going anywhere either, despite some reports in the media that with the recent struggles, Hamilton might be thinking, maybe the 8th isn't going to happen. I should just call it a day now. But Hamilton very adamant. Fred's the man to take us to the top. And look, if they give Fred Vasseur less time than Binotto got, it doesn't seem like that's really the right decision. And in all things considered, yes, this season has been a bit of a disaster for Ferrari compared to expectations. But you look at the championship, and they're second in the championship, right? And obviously they don't want to, and that's what Vasseur will say. And I don't want to make excuses for how poor Ferrari have done. But they are still second, right? And McLaren, given the step they made over the winter, were maybe unbeatable anyway. I think that's the way that I look at it. Obviously, Ferrari would have loved to have won races. They've won a sprint with Hamilton, but won races properly. They've got a couple of podiums with Leclerc so far this season. But I think McLaren, the theory in the winter was, if they take the risk they're taking and it works, they won't be beatable. And that's what we've seen, right? McLaren came into the season, they were ahead of Ferrari at the end of last year, they took risk at the end of the year, it paid off, and I don't really think there's much Ferrari could have done to beat McLaren this season anyway. So if they finish second in the championship, as bad as it is, in some respects it's maybe as good as they could have done anyway. And surely you don't want to derail your project 1 year before the massive regulation change that is to come. So I don't understand why Ferrari would really do it now. I understand why Vasseur's under pressure, and maybe I even understand why Ferrari, if it is true, or the Italian press are going to put a bit of pressure on. But equally, I just don't think that it would be a sensible decision. The drivers clearly agree as well, because Leclerc gave very much similar comments. Leclerc said this, these are rumours that I don't like to hear. I believe in Fred, like Fred has always believed in me. So both drivers very adamant that they don't want Fred Vasseur to go anywhere. And if he was to, I think it would, I think that's what might even shake Leclerc and Hamilton's confidence in the team more. It's just to think, I thought this, we thought that, it doesn't seem like a good plan, and yet they're going to do it anyway. That might be indicative of a very much wider problem at Ferrari. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Just one final thing I thought was kind of interesting. Leclerc was asked for comment on Hamilton as a teammate, the way that he drives. Because Leclerc in his career has been a relatively late breaker, but we know that it has been Hamilton's speciality. Doesn't always work on these cars as well as it used to work back in the day. but it is Hamilton's style, and that's how he gains some advantage for a large period of his career. But as Leclerc says, I'm still surprised with how late he brakes. How late he brakes is very, very, very impressive. In my career, I've always been the one braking later than my teammates. That's a particular driving style that I didn't really see in any of my teammates, but Lewis is a step ahead, even more so in that direction. So that surprised me. So look, at the end of the day, yeah, Hamilton's had a difficult time so far this season, with the exception of a couple of Grand Prix, but they are second in the championship, all things considered, and the team is at least optimistic that in 2026 they can turn it around. But according to the press, the next few Grand Prix and the upgrades that Ferrari bring are going to be critical to making sure Fred Vasseur's job is safe. So time will tell what's going to happen there, but intrigued to your thoughts in the comments section below. After this video is uploaded, going to head to the track, check out practice on the Friday. Of course, it looks like it's going to be a dry weekend. So this is the schedule UK time. Of course, subtract 5 hours from this for the actual time here in Canada. But yeah, the first practice session is in a few hours. Then the second practice session, I should be back this afternoon/evening to make a video talking about what's happened on the track today. And then, of course, qualifying tomorrow. And then the race on Sunday with a 2-hour discrepancy there. So it's a 4 p.m. local time quali, 2 p.m. local time Grand Prix. Very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.